I'm Clark Green with the Elite Angler Academy. Thank you for checking out my YouTube channel in this video. I told myself a long time ago that I wouldn't do any of these videos that you see a lot of these guys and pros doing, where they're sitting in the front seat of their car, making commentary about something they've got thoughts on. But I've been asked so many times over the last 2 or 3 days, what's happening at Sam Rayburn? More importantly, what is going on with the MLF BPT event that is happening over there, the Bass Pro Tour? Because a lot of these are locals that are wanting to know why it's fishing tough, what is going on, and why aren't these guys catching them better than, say, like Bass Champs that was there a couple weeks ago, where they absolutely smashed them. There was a few events over the last couple weeks where they smashed them. Prior to the cold front that we had, all the ice, you know, there weren't a whole lot of big bags. Derek Mundy had some monster sacks that people knew about. But other than that, fishing as a whole was kind of tough. A lot of the quality fish weren't showing up. But since then, the lake has been on fire and people are wanting to know what's happened. Well, I decided to do this video to answer a lot of those questions. And these questions right here actually pertain to any lake in the country whenever a pro event goes to your body of water. And you hear it all the time. Your buddy says, oh, I would have beaten those guys. I would have whooped those pros. They're not that good. I went out today and I had 25 pounds and those guys didn't catch nothing. They didn't do very good. And everybody wants to justify how they're better than these tour level guys that show up. And so I decided to do this video, and I've actually made a list. And this is a top 20 list of things that I've come across. I called and talked to Daryl Gleason a little while ago, who guided at Toledo Bend, fishes Rayburn quite a bit, fishes the Bassmaster Elite Series. We went over the list, added 1 or 2 more things. I talked to another guy that's fishing that NPFL, that National Pro Fishing League. They had their first event at Eufaula. You know, it was his first foray into traveling the country and fishing for big money with a big entry fee and traveling around. And you know, he like instantly got it. And he went over the list with me, and we added a couple more things there as well to come up with 20 things. And actually I've got 21 on the list now because more things keep popping into my head. And so if you've got a tour level event that's coming to your lake, keep these things in mind before you make a post on Facebook or on a forum, on Bass Boat Central, on Texas Fishing Forum, on the Sam Rayburn fishing page, on the Gunnersville fishing page, on whatever, because these are things that people don't take into account for whenever these tournaments come. You know, and you think, well, who am I to say that? Well, I teach the Elite Angler Academy on Sam Rayburn, on how to break down water at Rayburn and find spots. I guide on Rayburn, putting people on fish, you know, catching a lot of fish. This format fits my style of fishing as a guide. A lot of times, we don't always catch the biggest fish in the lake, but we catch a lot of fish. Have more days we catch 50 to 100 than days we don't through the course of the year. You know, but do we always catch an 8-pounder? Absolutely not. But we catch a ton of scoreable MLF fish. You know, what else qualifies me for this is I fished the FLW Tour for 6 years. I fished the Bassmaster Elite Series for 6 years. I know most of these guys on and off the water. I know what they're going through, and I can relate, and I understand these dynamics, so I can openly talk about and be transparent about these things. So without further ado, I'm going to go over this list that I've got and explain some of these to people that are wanting to know what's happening to their lake and why aren't they catching them as good. Number 1, you can't judge how people have success on any body of water unless apples to apples comparisons, you are there that very day on the water to experience those conditions, whether it be moon phases, stages of the spawn, fish were on beds, now they're not. The wind blew hard. That's a killer on Rayburn. If all of a sudden you caught them on Saturday and these guys aren't catching them, but the wind's blowing 20 miles an hour, so you do not have success, or they're not able to catch them because they can't fish what they want to fish, or they can't move around to be able to do that. Congest people up, makes it where they can't catch them. You know, it might be that you caught them the day before in the afternoon and these guys are fishing in the morning. There's current running, you know, on a TVA lake, and you caught them and these guys are fishing at a time where there's no current. You know, weekend pressure. I mean, there's so many variables that affect that. The weather, cold fronts came through. You know, it was bright and sunny. The wind blew. The wind didn't blow. You know, there are so many variables that if you're not on the water that day to experience that, you can't compare day by day. And even whenever you see these multi-day tournaments, you're seeing that happen where guys catch them one day and don't the next. Things change. In the MLF BPT format, 40 guys fish one day, 40 the next. You know, so their days are alternating. So they might blast them one day, and then the next day the conditions change, cold front hits, shut these fish down, something happens. All right. Number 2, locals don't find fish for multi-day tournaments. Most events on a local level, guys are fishing to catch the biggest 5-fish sack they can in one day, and they burn up their fish. We see it all the time fishing Toyota Series, Bassmaster Opens, things like that, where the local hammer will catch a monster bag on day 1, but can't back it up. A lot of times people burn all their fish, or they find enough fish for day 1 that's not gonna last them throughout the tournament, or they can't evolve as the tournament goes on and the pattern change. Say you went out and found a bunch of bedfish for day 1, well, you burn up those bedfish. If there's no more bedfish, you don't have more fish to go catch as the tournament progresses for multiple days. Or you got a co-angler that beats them up. These guys don't in this tournament, but you know, that's more pressure that you've put on those fish. They might have moved. They might have moved to stage differently. The bait might have moved, but you caught them on day 1 because that's all you had found. Okay, you might have burned up all your brush piles, something of that nature. Number 3, locals don't pay a $3,000 to $5,000 entry fee to enter a tournament. People don't have any clue what that's like to fish under that pressure of that sort of money, especially since a lot of these guys are paying a big chunk of it either out of tournament winnings, personal finances, or whatever else. Their wives are like, hey, you better get a check at this event. We got bills to pay. You know, when you've got that much money on the line, and it's getting to the point that if you go fish a BFL, pay a $250, $300 entry fee, that's not chump change by any stretch. But at the same time, the pressure isn't there. And if you're in a team tournament, the pressure is not there because you're splitting that money, splitting the expenses. These guys are not just spending that on a giant entry fee. They are spending that on expenses to get there, gas, food, lodging, being away from home. And all these things are going to be talked about in other parts of this list. But ultimately, not paying that giant entry fee, unless you've paid that, you don't get the amount of pressure that there is with that much money on the line. Number 4, most locals don't have a no info rule. You can talk to your buddies. Hey man, what'd you catch them on last week? What are the fish doing right now? I know a lot of guys call me when I'm guiding heavily, asking me what is going on at the lake. What depth brush piles do I need to target? Are the fish in the grass? Is there a shad spawn? You know, what area of the lake do I need to target? All these are things that are viable information that people can get from their buddies or other sources that these guys can't get up to a certain point in time. And so therefore they don't have up-to-date information. They can look at tournament results, they can look at publicly available information on fishing forums, on Facebook, they can look at a lot of these things, but getting that great information from some local hammer, that has been curtailed due to new rules in the Elite Series, MLF Pro Circuit, the BPT, all these, NPFL, all these have these no info rules now that weren't there in the past. And I'm not calling anybody out, but at the same time, information flowed for years in the world of pro fishing. Since the start of pro fishing, guys have made careers out of getting information. I have gotten information. Almost anybody you are going to name on tour has gotten information to some degree from somebody out there in the world at some point in time in their career. I'm not saying they get it now, but they get information to some degree at some point in their career. It might have been how to run into an area, or it might be you need to go fish Caney Creek or Sandy Creek or Bear Creek. It might be, hey, here's waypoints to brush piles. Let me take you out on the water and show you how to line up on this right here. Here's the baits you need. If the water drops 2 feet, you need to go over here. If it rises 3 feet, they're gonna go over here. If they're not here, they're going over there. These are 1,000 more waypoints to do exactly that thing, okay? Those rules have changed now, so that info that for a local event, it has changed. Guys aren't able to get that information that they were. And again, I'm not saying everybody used to do that. They've gotten some, but everybody has gotten some form of information at some event. And it's amazing how when you go to, like, I live here in Shreveport now, the Red River, where there was a couple of Bassmaster Classics, the names that guys throw out that of the people they helped that historically have condemned the no info rule of guys that they helped on the down low. It happens. It happened for years. But again, in today's time, it doesn't happen unless somebody's breaking a rule, and most of the polygraphs involved with these tour events have to do with the no info rule. People trying to break it or people trying to skirt around it, and that's the number one question that gets asked on these no info situations. Number 5, locals don't have a very long off-limits period, whether they're fishing a Triple T or a Bass Champs or some of these others. I know the outdoor tournaments at Rayburn are a big deal, and they have these week-long off-limits periods. Well, that off-limits period for a week, yes, things can change, but you have been out there quite a bit prior to that. If you fish tournaments at Sam Rayburn or Gunnersville or Eufaula or Chickamauga or any of these major tournament venues, you're on the water quite a bit if you are successful. You know, looking for fish, staying on them, and whatever else. You're trying to take the luck factor out of it. You go and pre-fish and scout prior. Well, these guys in all these circuits now, the lake goes off limits, you know, pretty much as soon as the schedule is announced. And because of that, these guys have not had time on the water, or it's 30-day off limits, which again, in the spring, everything changes in that 30-day period, whether fish move or whatever else. The shad does something different. You know, I could go into the whole dynamics of the seasonal patterns at Rayburn, how things change and move. But if you're not on the water to understand those things, and the only way I learned them is just from being on the water so much, these guys don't have that luxury to be able to do that. Okay. Number 6, and this is one of the big ones. When you see that guy that did not catch them very good, and only have 1 keeper or 3 keepers or whatever else, Rayburn is full of 1.5 to 1.9 pound bass. Absolutely chock full of them, like stupid. And again, I've got more days we catch 50 to 100 a day than days I don't, but that includes a lot of these size fish. And whenever people are out pre-fishing or out on their own fishing, they catch a fish that's 14 to 16 inches and is a keeper, and instantly they're going to be like, that's a 2-pounder. And it's not. When you put them on the board, they don't go 2 pounds. Sam Rayburn is full of spotted bass. I catch thousands upon thousands every year, and we eat a bunch of them because they're almost like trash fish on Sam Rayburn because the population is huge. And every year, I'll weigh a few of them that we think, well, that is a giant spotted bass for Sam Rayburn. And do you know what it weighs? 1.8 or 1.9. I probably catch legitimately 5 to 10 every year over 2 pounds on Sam Rayburn. Well, that eliminated a whole lot of the offshore fishing where guys are sitting there dragging on clay points and things like that because they're catching a lot of spotted bass and they're catching these non-keepers that most guys, again, look at that 14 to 16 inch bass, which Rayburn has a 14 inch minimum. They're looking at that and saying, that's a keeper, that's a 2-pounder, and it's not. Because these guys are putting them on the board. And you can see when you watch the videos, these guys are like praying almost, hopefully that's a 2-pounder. Good golly, I hope it's a 2-pounder to score. Because this time of year, the lake is full of male bass that aren't gonna weigh 2 pounds. And if you go throw a Cinco, yes, you might have a stellar day and catch 5 8-pounders at Sam Rayburn because it is what it is. But you are going to go through a lot of little male bass that are scrawny, skinny, have no weight, that aren't going to go 2 pounds. All right, the next one, number 7, the team tournament versus the individual tournament dynamic. And I've talked to a handful of the absolute hammers on Rayburn about this, and it applies, again, to every lake in the country. If you're ledge fishing, offshore fishing, rattle trapping, fishing grass, frogging in mats, whatever, 2 baits in the water is better than 1. If we're all throwing a Carolina rig on the same hump or the same point, that's 2 baits in the water. We can catch them twice as fast. Doubles are odds of catching keepers. And so, therefore, your chances of catching a big one are better. I've talked to a well-known team on Rayburn that is one of the absolute hammer teams, and they drag a Carolina rig a lot. And I've asked them, you know, when I go fish, you know, like a Bassmaster Open or something, an individual event, and I roll in with 13, 14 pounds. I said, okay, what would y'all have had individually in that boat? One of y'all caught a 7-pounder, but one of y'all would have had 11 pounds today. The other one would have had 14 pounds with what they caught. But cumulatively, they've got 18, 19 pounds because they had a 7-pounder, and you take their other biggest fish, and now they've got a tournament weight that people are seeing on the sheet at the end of the tournament. And so that's misleading. And that's what people don't understand. When you've got two guys, and in these pro events, he doesn't have somebody to kick other information off of. That guy to say, hey, quit being an idiot. We need to do this. Or I understand this. Or now I got two different baits in the water. You got a guy cranking and you got a guy dragging a Carolina rig. Well, that's two different variable baits. And oh, they're eating the crankbait better today than the Carolina rig. Well, let's both throw crankbaits at this point. Or let's throw a chatterbait and the other one, how about you drag a Senko? Well, or you fish a lot slower and you're trying to catch the big fish as opposed to I'm catching all the alpha fish that are feeding. You know, that's a dynamic that people don't realize when all they do is fish team tournaments is we need to catch the biggest sack we can, and you have multiple baits going and two baits in the water. You know, there's no advantage to one guy catching one over the other, you know, and that's what's happening is you've got one guy that's putting it all together, making adjustments, putting the fish in the boat for himself. All right, number 8. This is a big one with MLF, BPT. Is under that format, you have to keep putting points on the board. If you're not catching fish, you're not getting points. Yes, you can have a big flurry at the end of the day, but you're not getting those points to add up. And so it's kind of like I can go after and go frogging, or I can go flip, or excuse me, deep crank. Typical techniques that catch big fish or tournament grade fish in a 5-fish limit. But if these guys aren't putting points on the board, they're getting so far behind. And that's how come a guy that can sit there and wang on a whole bunch of 2 to 2.5 pounders on a Carolina rig and hole, or get on a school or schooling fish or something of that nature, you know, or sit on a bridge point where there's a pile of small ones, you know, he's able to run the score up and not get caught, is because of the format. If you aren't putting points on the board, you've got to make quick adjustments on the fly. And so therefore, these guys are having to balance all of that while they're out there. Number 9, they don't have your magic spot. And in reality, this is the biggest one that locals don't understand. It's because, yeah, you've got that magic brush pile. And we see this all the time in opens and AAA level events, and tour level guys will dip down and fish these. If they're not on your spot that you're banking on whenever you put your money up 6 months ago to get in the event, you're not going to catch them. You're not going to do well enough. So you're basically gambling that they're going to be on your honey hole or your stretch of grass or that one creek drain or that channel bend or that one hard spot. And most of the time, they're not. They're not there on the day you need them. And these guys don't have that spot, even if they are there. And that is what most locals don't understand. You know the lake. These guys are coming from out of town. That they know the lake somewhat. They've all been to Rayburn numerous times. It's a major tournament stop. But at the same time, you've got that spot that you think is the deal. And if they're on that deal, you're going to catch them. Well, this guy doesn't have that information. So take your spot out of the equation when you're wondering why they're not catching. Okay. Number 10, people don't realize how hard it is with conditions constantly changing when we're at these tour events. You know, cold front, rain, cloud cover, the conditions change, fish move. And again, they all kind of relate to each other, a lot of these on the list, but changing on the fly is hard. And again, I'll give you an example about Rayburn. When you go rattle trapping, you can commit to throwing that trap all day. And people think this is what I'm going to do. And by the end of the day, I'm going to have a good enough sack to compete in a tournament. The problem is, if they're not on that rattle trap very well, you don't have enough time to throw that audible. And so these guys are some of the absolute best in the world at switching things up and adjusting when they're on the water. If you don't believe me, talk to anybody that you know that fishes, that's made a run at pro fishing, that has failed miserably, has gotten their teeth kicked in, has put Van Damme's kids through college. These are all things that they will tell you it is hard to adjust on the fly. And that's what these guys are so good at. All of a sudden this happens and they just get this inclination and they turn the boat around and they go somewhere else. They scrap what they're doing because it's not good enough for the format of the event and do something completely different based off something they see. You know, and guys will tell you about that weird scenario where it happened to them, where they just made this right decision, something clicked intuitively, and they made a run 30 miles up the lake to go fish something, you know, dirty water, clear water, something. You know, I dropped what I was doing and it started running windblown points because the conditions were right. Well, most people on a local level get fixated on what they're doing and what they need to do, and it's hard to deviate. And again, these guys are doing that. So it also goes back to what we were saying about if you're not there on those exact days, it's hard to say what's happening.